For me, I've always just been so passionate about beauty. It's definitely been in my veins since a young teenager when I suffered with hormonal acne, and looking at beauty as a way to express and find confidence through a really what I would consider a bit of a shameful period, which then led me to go into magazine predominantly, but the whole ecosystem of media and advertising, working with luxury brands, but also predominantly beauty brands, which then I was lucky enough to start to forge this career that I'm now in as an entrepreneur and co-founder of Strand Scalp Care, which is incredible, but also co-owner of Three Warriors.
And tell us a bit about the magazine background, because I'm also from a magazine background, monthly glossy magazines. I think you're from the same background.
Yes.
How has that shaped what you do? Because it's a very interesting background to be from, isn't it? You see a lot, and I think you learn a lot about how to position things and present things.
Definitely. It was such an incredible period. It was before social media had come in. Glossy mags was still all the rage. And I think one of my biggest takeouts for that was really understanding brand, but how brand then connected with community and with people through content and content first. Overlaying that was the advertising element. So it was like, yes, we have editorial authority, we have community, but then there's other brands and advertisers that want to connect both with that community and with the editors. So it was always finding that sweet spot of where is it that you can influence, but also attract and community build, and being such like a visual platform, it really helped refine what brand looked like.
Yeah, because both the brands you've created are famously good looking, as brands have to be nowadays. Tell us a bit about the look and feel of those brands and how that relates to what you would have seen in magazines.
Definitely. I think it was just being very clear on who you are, who it is that you're trying to connect with, and then from a visual point of view, how do you activate that? You need to really be scroll stopping and ensure that you're getting attention, and particularly if the brands are looking to have a retail play, how do they actually stand out on shelf and people want to lean into it and it doesn't look like you've seen it before. I really love obviously taking inspiration and there's influence, but it's nice to carve your own path, and I think both brands, both Strand and Three Warriors, do that extremely well. They're very unique in the way that they show up and the way that they connect with people.
Because so most founders are leading one brand and you're leading two. How does that work? You're involved with two. How does that work in terms of how do you divide your time, focus and thinking? What's your core priority? What's the core brand you're working on?
Definitely. I think at different times, each brand will need something different from you. At the moment, I'm spending most of my time in Three Warriors, which is fantastic and it's super exciting, growing into new markets and quite a lot of time on MPD. With Strand, a lot of my role was very early days, so brand positioning, white space, the trends, where it needed to sit, brand identity and working on that kind of NPD, but that community connection and customer segmentation on how that would then manifest and come to life.
Great. So let's talk about category creation, because that's something you've done with Strand. Just tell us about that journey and how to do it.
Coming from a media advertising beauty background, it was always on the pulse, watching what's happening, what community was saying. I love social watching. I think that's really important. And listening, just listening to people. So when Strand first came about, there was the opportunity with my co-founders to launch a dandruff product, because there was obviously Head and Shoulders the number 1, number 2 selling shampoo in most markets in the world. But when we dug deeper and really looked at what consumers wanted, and what they also didn't know they wanted, but we were identifying in adjacent categories such as wellness, it really became prevalent that a lot of the education that needed to happen there was more treating the skin on the scalp as skin, which then obviously has now led to this huge skinification of hair. At the time, that wasn't such a thing, so I think we definitely contributed to that category, but it made a lot of sense to take all these beautiful beauty rituals, pick them up and bring them into a category that was quite, I guess you could say there was a lot of shame around it, and it was normalizing that conversation. So we really set out on threefold. So one, normalize the conversation and take the shame and stigma away from a community standpoint, recategorize it so that it was more adjacent to beauty and bringing in those principles and rituals, and then the science. So it felt like a lot of what pre-existed there was very heavily reliant on chemicals, noxious scents. There wasn't much pride, both from product performance, ingredient, and then brand positioning and how it looked. So by tapping into the science of probiotics and prebiotics, we were able to bring in a lot of those wellness principles, which, given the fact that the wellness category had already done such a great education piece with gut health, microbiome, prebiotics and probiotics, we could leverage that as a launch pad to continue that education piece on how that's applicable to other areas of the body.
God, it's a really interesting thing to have to do, because you're right. I guess there was a lot of shame around. What were people feeling ashamed of? Dandruff or hair loss? Or what were they feeling ashamed of? And how did you educate around that? Because I think that category has been created in quite a short period of time, the category of scalp care, whereby there's premium brands like Strand and you actually feel really proud and want to use them.
Yes.
How did you divide your marketing between kind of education and direct response in order to land those messages?
It gave me so much anxiety the week before we launched, because we're in a bright orange bottle. Yeah. And this is dandruff. This is a category that people are generally, there's no pride around, and it's not something that you necessarily want to see in your shower. And here I am coming out, and us and the team are coming out with this bright orange bottle that's literally screaming scalp concerns. So it was definitely reframing it as a beauty, as skin, and normalizing that conversation. And I think going to market and doing it being very strong in the beauty space really helped to do that.
And what's difficult about creating a category? There must be cost in terms of educating consumers through marketing.
Definitely.
And patience required as consumers get the message. What's the downside of it? What's the challenges?
Absolutely. I think when creating a new category internally as well, people can almost become tired of saying the same thing over and over again. But that consistency is so important. So there's just some things that, as we were talking about earlier with marketing expenses and things, that time can't cheat. So it's allowing yourself the time, irrespective of marketing budgets or anything else, so that you can get that consumer adoption. But even though you think you may have said it like 1,000 times, your community or your customer is just hearing it. So you really need to solidify that message, ensure that it's consistent so that you're getting those compounded results.
Great, fantastic. So in terms of funding, you've got two very different models that you've worked with over both brands. Do you want to run us through the big picture and how they've been funded and what you've learned from that?
Definitely. So 3 Warriors, we're still self-funded, which is quite an amazing achievement. It definitely has pros and cons on both sides of the coin. And then Strand is VC-backed. So there were numerous raises that have gone into creating that brand, which I think has definitely helped to accelerate growth a lot quicker. It allows more hiring, resourcing, and then to be able to take on bigger retailers such as your Sephora and back that.
And what have you found that you've enjoyed most about each model? If you could choose one model, I always like to know which one people ultimately think is best.
I really don't know. I think it depends on the brand. If I was creating a new brand now, depend on the brand where I wanted it to end. I think so often there's this appeal of, say, a big exit. Yeah. But there's also something really great about a lifestyle brand that affords you the life that you want to live. So I think being really clear on what kind of journey do you want, but also what kind of end part do you want? Because I think so often when it comes to creation, what attracts people like me and other founders and entrepreneurs is just creating. Like, that's the joy and that's the fun part. But you don't really sit and think about what happens if I don't want to do this brand anymore, or where do I actually want it to go, or what is the end goal? And I think that's where a lot of the financial modelling comes into play. So the raising question, I think, is very dependent on what kind of business that you want to build, what kind of business you want to work in, and what kind of business you want to leave behind.